Driving through a snowstorm on a lonely, dark road, I had no idea the seemingly stranded stranger ahead would turn my trip into a heart-pounding nightmare. What started as a simple act of kindness became a fight to escape a chilling trap. I had been visiting my family for the holidays, and the trip back home was a grueling 10-hour drive. On the way there, I split it into 2 parts to make it manageable. But heading back, I decided to push through the entire journey in one go. Everything was fine until I hit the halfway mark, and snow began falling steadily. At first, it wasn't anything to worry about, but as I continued, the snow intensified, and the sun began to dip below the horizon. By the time I was about 3 hours from home, it was pouring heavily, and darkness enveloped the road. The visibility was poor, and the emptiness of the road didn't help. But I pressed on, thinking about finally being home by nightfall. About 30 minutes after passing the nearest town, I noticed something unusual on the road ahead. The glow of headlights broke through the white snow blanket, revealing a car stuck sideways, blocking most of the paved road. Its hazard lights flickered weakly, and a man stood beside the vehicle, waving me down. I didn't want to stop. Something about the whole scene felt off, but there was no way around his car. Reluctantly, I pulled up behind him and rolled down my window. The man approached quickly, shivering, and asked if I could help push his car out of the snow. His voice was slow, his accent thick, as if English wasn't his first language. Eager to get moving again, I agreed. His car didn't seem buried too deeply, so a quick push might do the trick. Throwing on my hat and gloves, I stepped out of my warm car into the biting cold. The snow and wind hit me like a wall, chilling me to the bone. I questioned why this guy hadn't just called for help instead of standing out here. Still, I walked to the back of his car, waiting for him to grab his gloves. As I stood there, I noticed something strange. The man leaned into his front seat for what seemed like too long. I thought I heard him muttering, but the howling wind muffled everything. When he finally emerged, I asked, "Were you talking to me?" He hesitated, then said he'd just been talking to himself. He smiled, but something about his expression had changed. It felt forced, almost unnatural. We moved to the back of the car to start pushing, but an eerie feeling crept over me. His demeanor had shifted. The friendly tone from earlier was gone, replaced by a cold, unsettling presence. A thought struck me. If someone else was in the car with him, why had he stopped me? My gut screamed at me to leave, but before I could act, I noticed he was staring at me. His lifeless eyes and blank expression sent a shiver down my spine. Suddenly, I heard the creak of doors opening. 3 men stepped out of his car, their silhouettes barely visible in the snowstorm. They were moving fast, heading straight for me. Without hesitation, I bolted toward my car, adrenaline surging. Luckily, I had left my car running. I jumped in, slammed the door, and threw it into drive. The narrow path around their car was treacherous, but I didn't care. My tires spun slightly on the slick snow, but I managed to maneuver around their vehicle, nearly clipping one of the men in my rush. My heart pounded as I sped down the road, glancing in my rearview mirror to ensure they weren't following. The relief of escaping didn't erase the terror of what could have happened. When I reached the next town, I immediately reported the incident to the police. They took my statement, but I never heard back. As far as I know, those men abandoned the scene shortly after I left. I don't know their intentions, but I can guess. One thing's for sure, if I hadn't trusted my instincts and fled, this story might have ended very differently. Let me know in the comments. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever experienced something similar? Stay safe out there and always trust your gut when something feels off. What would you do if you heard strange noises above your bedroom, only to discover someone had broken into your home while you were still inside? This chilling encounter happened to me last winter, and it's something I'll never forget. It was late November, the first snowfall of the season. Forecasters had predicted just a light dusting, maybe an inch or two. Nothing major. I got home from work around 8 p.m., and by then, snowflakes were already falling steadily, covering everything in a soft white blanket. After heating up some leftover pizza for dinner, I settled downstairs, scrolling mindlessly for a couple of hours. Around 10 p.m., I decided to head to my bedroom upstairs. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and was about to find something to watch when I heard it. A dull, heavy thud directly above me. For a moment, I froze. The sound was faint but distinct, something hitting the roof. My first thought was the weight of snow shifting. The house wasn't exactly in perfect condition, so I worried about potential damage or leaks. Still, I brushed it off as a minor issue and tried to focus on my laptop. But then it happened again. Another thud, and another. The noise traveled, moving in a straight line across the ceiling. This wasn't random, it sounded deliberate. My initial calm was replaced by unease. Determined to figure out what was going on, I threw on my winter jacket, stepped outside into the bitter cold, and looked up at the roof. To my surprise, the side of the roof directly above my bedroom was completely bare. All the snow had slid off and formed a pile near the front of the house. The rest of the roof, as well as my neighbors' roofs, still had untouched layers of snow. Something about this didn't sit right. Shivering, I stood there, staring. Had something, or someone, been on the roof, causing the snow to fall? With no clear answers, I went back inside, stomping the snow off my boots. But the moment I stepped into the hallway, my heart stopped. There were puddles of water stretching across the floor, melting snow. The trail snaked through the hallway into the living room and up the stairs toward the bedrooms. Panic set in as I noticed something else, a wet footprint imprinted in one of the puddles. I didn't hesitate. I spun around, rushed back outside, and shut the door behind me. Standing on the street, I called the police, my breath visible in the freezing air. As I tried to explain the situation to the dispatcher, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. My bedroom window. Someone was there. A figure stood behind the glass, their outline faint but unmistakable. They stared down at me for only a second before disappearing into the shadows of the room. My blood ran cold. I kept my eyes locked on the house, but I didn't see the figure again. The minutes stretched endlessly as I waited for the police, piecing together what had happened. Someone had climbed onto my roof, likely using the trees that hung over the house. They must have walked across it, causing the snow to slide off, and found an unlocked window to slip inside. When the police arrived, they searched the house but found no one. Still, their findings confirmed my fears. The boot prints led from my bedroom window through the entire house, as if they'd been searching for something, or someone. What chilled me the most was realizing just how close our paths had crossed. While I was outside inspecting the roof, they were already inside. If I had gone back inside even a minute earlier, I might have walked right into them. Nothing was stolen, and the intruder was never caught. To this day, I don't know if it was a random break-in or something more sinister. It's been almost a year, and while I haven't experienced anything like it since, I'll never feel entirely safe in this house again. Some questions will never have answers, and that's what haunts me the most. Was it just a random break-in, or did they come for me specifically? That night changed the way I see my own home, a place I thought was safe. I've taken every precaution since then, but no amount of locks or alarms can erase the memory of seeing someone standing in my window, watching me. I've learned to stay vigilant and trust my instincts, but on quiet, snowy nights, I still find myself glancing at the roof, wondering if someone might return. Let this be a reminder. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't what you hear, but what you don't. Have you ever been home alone on a cold, stormy night, only to hear a stranger at your door, someone who doesn't belong there? Let me take you back to one of the most unsettling nights of my life, a night I'll never forget. It was a bitterly cold night in mid-December, and I was just 17 years old. Every year, right before Christmas week, my mom would leave for a 3-day business trip. Being an only child, I'd gotten used to spending those nights alone in the house. Normally, I'd have school to keep me busy during the day, but this year was different. My mom's trip coincided with the start of our winter break, leaving me with an empty house and a long stretch of time to kill. A snowstorm had hit our city that week, making it impossible to go outside. So I did what any teenager would do. I made some food from the fridge and settled in for a movie marathon. The wind howled outside, and every so often the storm would pick up, making the windows rattle. I had to pause the movie several times because the noise was so loud it drowned out the dialogue. Every time I looked outside, it seemed like the storm had gotten worse. Around 7 or 8 in the evening, I heard something unusual, footsteps crunching in the snow outside my front door. They were slow and deliberate, accompanied by a few coughs, as if the person was struggling against the cold. I froze, waiting for the sound of a knock or the doorbell, but it never came. Minutes passed and I started to feel uneasy. Finally, I worked up the courage to walk to the door and peek outside. No one was there, but what struck me as odd were the footprints in the snow. They led right up to my front door and then abruptly turned back, heading toward the street. How had I not heard them leaving? And why would someone come all the way to the door, only to leave without knocking? I tried to brush it off, reasoning that maybe it was someone confused by the storm who realized they'd come to the wrong house. It seemed plausible enough, so I went back to my movie, though the uneasiness lingered. As the night wore on, the storm only grew worse. The power flickered a few times, plunging the house into darkness for several minutes at a time before coming back on. By now, it was around 11 p.m., and I had given up on watching TV. Instead, I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone when I heard a loud thump against the side of the house. I hesitated, trying to convince myself it was just the wind or maybe some snow falling off the roof. But then the power went out again, and I couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. Turning on my phone's flashlight, I decided to check it out. The sound had come from the side of the house near the kitchen, so I cautiously made my way there, peeking out the window. I didn't see anything unusual and was just about to turn back when I heard a voice from the back door. "Hey!" I jumped, my heart pounding as I turned toward the sound. A man was standing outside, pressed up against the glass. The back porch light was off, so his figure was mostly cloaked in shadow, but I could make out his face as he peered inside. "Hey, kid," he said, his voice muffled by the glass. "Would you open the door for me? It's freezing out here." For a moment, I just stood there, paralyzed with fear and confusion. Something about him felt wrong, his tone, his expression. It wasn't desperation. It was something more menacing. "Kid, come on, open the door," he said again, this time with more urgency. I shook my head, slowly backing away. That's when his expression changed. His face twisted into a scowl, and he slammed his fist against the glass. "Open the door!" he shouted, his voice booming over the howling wind. I ran to the living room, grabbed my phone, and tried to call 911. My phone's signal was weak, likely because of the storm, and the call dropped multiple times. Meanwhile, the man continued pounding on the door, yelling angrily. My hands were shaking as I redialed over and over, until, finally, I got through and managed to explain what was happening. The man didn't wait around for long after that. By the time the police arrived, nearly 30 minutes later, he was gone. The snowstorm likely delayed them, and by then, the man's footprints had been all but erased by the wind and snow. I called my mom right away and told her what had happened. Neither she nor the police could figure out who the man was or what his intentions had been. Was he genuinely in need of help, or was he trying to trick me into letting him in? I'll never know for sure, but I can still see his face pressed against the glass in my mind. I never saw him again after that night, but I'll always remember the chilling feeling of standing there, knowing something wasn't right. To this day, I double-check every lock when I'm home alone, especially during a storm. Working night shifts at a gas station is usually predictable. Long, quiet hours and the occasional late-night customer. But on this particular night, something happened that made my heart pound and left me questioning how close I came to danger. I've been working at the same gas station for a few years, and most nights follow a predictable pattern. That night, I clocked in at 8 p.m., taking over from the day shift worker, who wasted no time heading home. The first few hours were routine, with a steady stream of customers coming in for snacks or paying for gas. By 11 p.m., business slowed down as usual, and the hours began to drag. To keep myself occupied, I restocked shelves and tidied up the store. But eventually, I ran out of tasks. That's when the dreaded slow half of my shift began, the long stretch between midnight and dawn, when boredom set in and time seemed to crawl. Around 1 a.m., I noticed a car pulling into the lot. It parked directly in one of the spaces near the entrance, which was unusual. Most people stopping by at this hour only came for gas and rarely parked to enter the store. I straightened up, expecting the driver to come inside, but several minutes passed and no one got out. Curious, I leaned over the counter to get a better look, but the reflections on the glass door obscured my view. The driver was a mystery. Maybe they were just taking a break from a long drive. Deciding it wasn't worth worrying about, I sat back down and pulled out my phone to pass the time, scrolling through random articles to keep myself awake. About 20 minutes later, something made me glance up, and my stomach dropped. There was a man standing in one of the aisles, staring directly at me. I hadn't heard the door open or seen him enter. My heart raced as I took in his appearance. He looked to be in his mid-40s, with a scruffy beard and a dark jacket. His eyes quickly darted away when he realized I was watching him. I froze, trying to piece together how he had gotten inside without me noticing. The man began walking around the store, but every so often he would glance in my direction, as if checking to see if I was still watching. It felt like he was waiting for an opportunity, maybe for me to look away. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he bolted towards the door and ran outside. Confused and unsettled, I quickly got up and looked through the glass. His car was still parked where it had been, but he didn't get back inside. Instead, he walked past it and disappeared into the darkness along the road. Still shaken, I decided to check the security cameras to figure out what had happened. It didn't take long to find the footage of him stepping out of the car. What chilled me was what happened next. He didn't head for the store entrance, but instead crept around to the back of the building. The gas station's back doors were always left unlocked since we were technically open 24/7, but there weren't any cameras covering that area. What stood out even more was the time gap. He spent 15 minutes somewhere in the back before quietly stepping onto the sales floor where I finally saw him. I called the police, and when they arrived to investigate, they uncovered even more disturbing details. The car he left behind was reported stolen months ago. However, they had no leads on who the man was or what his intentions might have been. The thought that he had spent so much time sneaking around the store, possibly planning something, sent chills down my spine. Whatever he had in mind that night, he changed his mind. Maybe he noticed the cameras or saw something that made him reconsider. One thing was clear. I was lucky. Whatever he planned to do, he chose not to follow through, and for that, I'm grateful. That night made me realize how unpredictable and unsettling working the night shift can be, and I'll never forget the eerie feeling of seeing him standing there, watching me, And that's the story of the night I'll never forget. A night where I realized how fragile safety can feel during the quiet hours of the night shift. If you enjoyed this chilling tale and want to hear more suspenseful stories, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more spine-tingling tales to life. Also, share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think the man's true intentions were? Have you ever experienced something similar? Let's keep the discussion alive. Stay safe out there, and until next time, keep the lights on. You never know what's lurking in the shadows.